We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Hi, everyone. This is Lou Palumbo, and with me, as always, is my co-host. I almost called him my sidekick. My co-host, Tom Fuentes, former Assistant Director of the FBI. And today we have joining us Chris Swecker, who was also a former Assistant Director of the FBI. So we've got two very qualified gentlemen who lived the different FBI, and we're going to get into that in a moment. Concerns, the same, borders, crime in your city, carjackings going through the roof in Washington, D.C. This foreign policy of ours is confounding. I see no light at the end of the tunnel with this economy. But I want to start this off because having two gentlemen that were both former assistant directors of the FBI, I want to start to come to you gentlemen with what happened to the FBI and when did this whole, I would say, unraveling of the FBI management start to occur? Tom, you want to jump on that first, and I'll go to Chris.
Well, in my opinion, it started really during the Trump campaign for president the first time, 2015, and it continued on from then on, actually, the rest of the Trump presidency. So we have efforts to take Trump off the campaign, not win the campaign, not win the nomination. And then he not only gets nominated, but he gets elected president. And you have senior executives at the time within the FBI communicating with each other by text message of how much they basically hate Trump and they're going to get him. So you have Peter Strzok, a deputy assistant director, communicating with an FBI attorney, Lisa Page, and they're talking to each other about what a tragedy it is having Trump. And Strzok says to her by text message that, well, don't worry, even if he gets elected, we've got an insurance policy. Basically, we're still going to get him. And that coincides, of course, with after he gets elected, the entire Russiagate investigation known as Crossfire Hurricane. So I think that it was around 2015, 2016, into the Trump initial phases of his presidency, where the FBI senior executives in the National Security Division, and Chris Swecker and I both came up in the criminal division originally, but Strzok basically says they're going to get him, and they've got a policy, insurance policy to get him. And it coincides, of course, with what becomes the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the use of FISA to get wiretaps on individuals associated with the Trump campaign, like Carter Page. And, so it starts really, I think, around that time.
Interesting. Chris, give us your perception on this topic. And I know you were a generation of FBI that I don't want to say no longer exists. I just think it doesn't exist in the management ranks. I think, and I believe many people I speak to feel the same as I do. 99.5% of this organization are dedicated to keeping this country safe. But what's your take on this discussion, Chris?
Yeah, Lou, it's similar to Tom's. I think the sort of the bellwether moment was when Comey became the director of the FBI, Jim Comey. Now, Tom and I served under several different directors. I mean, starting with William Webster, who had been a federal judge. We had Louis Freeh. We had Robert Mueller. We had Sessions mixed in there. He was a mixed bag. He was former federal judge as well. But in that era, I don't think I ever saw politics enter into an investigation at the management level, more, and especially not at the street level. I mean, occasionally you'd see some decisions you thought, okay, they're a little bit afraid of, they're taking sort of the sensitivities of the case into consideration as opposed to just the merits of the case. We'd see AUSAs make decisions based on sensitivities, if you will. But when Jim Comey came in, he's a company man. He's dyed-in-the-wool Department of Justice. During our era, we saw a lot of pushback from the FBI to the Department of Justice, and that's how it was designed to be. The FBI is supposed to be sort of semi-independent, even though they report, the director reports into the Attorney General. What we see with Comey is he is a company man, and he's got a huge ego. And he decides for himself that Donald Trump is not fit to be president. And I think that leaks down through the ranks. You know, he chose Andy McCabe, who was sort of a marginally performing agent. He briefed well, but he had his political backdrop as well. I mean, he as Tom discussed, he hated Trump. Then you had Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, and others. And this is when politics starts to enter into the FBI's sort of, not into their DNA, but into the decision making at the highest levels. Because the decision that Comey made to handle that press conference, make a prosecutive decision that he had no right to make, had no authority to make, had no basis to make. Yet he stood up in front of the cameras. He related all the reasons why Hillary Clinton should be prosecuted, and he said, "But we decided we're not going to prosecute him." Took the ball right out of the hands of the Attorney General. Not sure she would have made a different decision, but it doesn't matter. At that moment, he injected politics into the FBI, and I don't think it's stopped since then. I think that we have a preponderance of DOJ people coming into the FBI at the highest levels. And they will do what this was part of the reason that the FBI makes political decisions. They are very, very subservient to the Department of Justice now. And the Attorney General is in lockstep with this administration. You don't have to tell him what to do. He knows exactly what he's supposed to do, as do his minions. So like special prosecutor that's going after Trump right now, Jack Smith. They don't need direct instructions. It's like political corruption. It's just understood. This is what you're supposed to do. So that leaks down to the next management level and the next management level. And now we see there's no boundaries. You don't check your political ideology at the door when you go to work. It's fair game for these ideologues, if you will, to allow their political colors to influence their decisions and how they shape a case at work. If I had my way, I mean, that would put the strictest of guidelines on any case that involved a presidential candidate or a president or anyone at the highest levels of government. The FBI should not have they've proven that they don't have the wherewithal to push back on the Department of Justice when they try to get them involved in these political cases, if you will.
I have a question for both of you gentlemen. Being that you're of similar background, not just the fact that you're FBI agents, but you're both assistant directors. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are only 3 assistant directors at any given time. Is that a correct statement, Chris?
No, I think when Tom and I were ADs, I think there were 9, but there were the service divisions. The big ones were international operations, criminal, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and cyber. But there were other service divisions. And I think Tom ran international operations, didn't you, Tom?
Yeah. My last 5 years in the Bureau, I ran the LEGAF program, the attaches around the world.
Right. So, but guys, I want to ask you both this question, which to me is, I guess it's troubling as to after Comey came out with that press conference where he basically gave Hillary Clinton a pass and decided as an investigator not to prosecute a case, which is clearly the prerogative of the prosecutorial arm of government, in this instance, the U.S. attorneys. Why wasn't there some outcry or severe pushback? I mean, this was unprecedented. The 3 of us by background are investigators. The quality of the case for a prosecutor is predicated on the thoroughness of our investigation. He, as you mentioned, Chris, he took that prerogative away from the attorneys that represent our government. Why wasn't this just severely objected to, and why wasn't that addressed? It appeared, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to ask you first, Tom, it went unaddressed. Am I correct?
Yes, it did go unaddressed. And I think what Comey did by doing that was he takes away, basically, he takes the heat off of the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch at the time. That should have been her decision. Now, as you recall, a couple days before Comey makes that speech, Loretta Lynch lands at going to Phoenix, Arizona to give a speech or something. Just happens that Bill Clinton is sitting on the plane on the tarmac at the same airport, and Loretta Lynch goes over, enters the plane to say hi to Clinton. And they're together about 30 minutes, and then that becomes public that they had this meeting. And of course, Bill's wife, Hillary, the investigative results of the investigation on her have not been revealed yet. So what Loretta basically did was say, okay, FBI, you decide. What the appropriate decision should have been that she's going to recuse herself, therefore the deputy attorney general, on down the line, somebody, an official at the Department of Justice, will make the decision whether Hillary gets prosecuted or not. And I don't care if it goes down the ranks to the janitor at DOJ, that's where the decision, but Comey took it on himself to say he cites all the reasons why anybody would prosecute the case, then says no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute this case. Well, what happens then basically is he gives Hillary Clinton immunity, because if any prosecutor later tries to prosecute her for what she did, destroying her devices and the emails and not complying with subpoenas, then the first witness in the U.S. versus Hillary would be Comey.
Jim Comey.
They'd put Comey on the stand and say, you were director of the FBI and you didn't think she should be prosecuted. Is that true? Yes, it is. Case closed. Case closed. She's not going to be prosecuted.
Let me ask you a question, though, Tom and Chris. Is there a sanctioning mechanism for the FBI director the same way there might be for an attorney or an elected official? You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, it's called impeachment, or he could be fired by the attorney general, or the president telling the attorney general fire the director, but he could also be impeached. And so
where were the Republicans, Tom? Where were the Republicans to start a discussion about impeaching Comey and challenging his authority? Basically, he operated, correct me if I'm wrong, outside of the boundaries of the law. He did not have the prerogative to determine if a case was going to be prosecuted. His responsibility was limited to producing a product that our attorney general or her subordinates could prosecute. I don't understand how this thing slipped through the cracks, and I'm not holding either one of you gentlemen accountable. I think we're all equally offended, and we all are aware of the impact it had, not just on the election potentially, but on the honor and the integrity that's been associated with the FBI for generations, forget decades. So, look, I've said to you before, Tom and Chris, you need to know this. I don't find any pleasure referencing the FBI in any derogatory manner. I'm a former law enforcement agent. I've always held the FBI in the highest esteem of any of our law enforcement groups. They were the stopgap. When all else failed, we knew the FBI would step up because we felt they could never be compromised. They always had that perception of being somewhat unapproachable, which is a good way to be. You guys, you kept it straight and narrow. The question now, Chris, I ask you, how do we go back, Tom? How do we get this back on track, Chris?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, and I think Tom feels the same way. It is absolutely heartbreaking to look up and see that all the law enforcement officers, even that have been through the National Academy, not all, but a large percentage of them who have always supported the FBI. The people in my community, and I travel in a lot of different circles, just every day Joe's out there that I play golf with, always respected the FBI, always supported the FBI. Now we see that at least half of the country, if not more, don't trust the FBI. And they need that. We need the FBI. We need them to be, the marquee agency, the iconic agency that it has been in the past, because they have the most important missions in intelligence and law enforcement in this country. I mean, not to diminish the role of the collective law enforcement community, but they are the ones that handle public corruption, counterintelligence, intelligence, cyber. And these are areas that are absolutely critical to us in this country. And to see that people who have traditionally supported the FBI respected the FBI like yourself, Lou, now don't trust them. And I walked that right back and put it in Jim Comey's lap and some of the succeeding directors from there, from there on. I mean, I know Chris Wray. I vouched for Chris Wray when he was being considered as a director. We had been counterparts. He was head of the DOJ criminal, the AAG criminal for DOJ, and I was the AD criminal for the FBI. We had a lot of interaction. But he is a company man. He will do what he senses that DOJ wants him to do. He likes being director. He doesn't want to lose, he wants to fulfill his 10-year term. There's a lot of gravitas that goes with that in the circles of DOJ lawyers and big silk stocking law firms. So he's going to go with the program. And the program right now is do what the administration wants you to do. And that has resulted in some of the egregious situations that we've seen, the Hunter Biden laydown of the FBI, the kitted out raid Mar-a-Lago, but it would be unseemly if we did this with Hunter Biden, contrast those two decisions where the prosecutors, according to the whistleblowers, would not allow them to even question the Bidens, especially Joe, and would not allow them to execute a search warrant. That would be unseemly, but yet they come fully kitted out for Donald Trump and they go after him from every angle. And there's only right-wing extremism. There's not left-wing extremism. And, January 6th is catastrophic. We're going to scorch the earth looking for every person that entered the Capitol versus, the Black Lives Matter movement and the Summer of Love where, we know how many literally thousands of police officers injured, police cars torched, government buildings taken over, police station taking over completely. So they had to abandon the police station. All that goes by the wayside. So you can't help but think, even Tom and I don't want to think this way. We don't want to think that the FBI has got their thumb on the scale, but we're reasonable people and we're logical people and we have experience with the agencies. And if you're objective, you have to ask these questions. Why, do they lay down on the Hunter Biden investigation completely? We know what a real thorough investigation looks like. That's not it. So, it's a long windup to say it's heartbreaking. How do we get it back? I think you have to, I hate to say it, there has to be a wholesale leadership change in the FBI. And I'm sure this
I can
will
interrupt you though, sir. I can interrupt
Yeah.
you. I agree with you saying that there needs to be a wholesale change in the leadership of the FBI, but I think this is a systemic failure. It's bigger than the FBI. I think these political administrations, regardless of who they are, Democrat or Republican, need to step off the FBI and let them return to who they once were, impartial.
Right.
That's what I think needs to happen. Part of my fear is that Donald Trump will get in and the FBI will become his tool. This
Right.
whole mentality, you see my point? And he's already
Yes.
alluding to that.
Right.
And this whole mentality of manipulating the FBI to carry out our political agenda has to stop. It's that simple. I hear what you're saying, Chris, but I think it's a much broader stroke than just
Agreed.
changing the hierarchy. Because if the president and his attorney general, who you answer to directly, are trying to pull your strings, we have the same damn problem. We just have a different flavor of ice cream. And that's where the change has to come in. And that's the commitment that should be addressed right now during this campaign about stepping on. Whoever's running should say, listen, we're going to let the FBI return to who they once were. Impartial, dedicated, and committed to keeping this country safe, independent of politics. There's not just an issue here, gentlemen, about the integrity of the FBI. There's a whole lack of trust and integrity in our government. You talk to people today, it's not even funny. Do you trust the government? No. Do you trust the media? No. Do you trust the FBI? No. Do you trust local law enforcement? No. Now we don't trust our educational institutions. Somebody's got to pull their head out of their hiney at some point and understand what we're doing to this country. And I remind everyone, the comments that you're listening to are not being made as people who are elected officials running for office, Democrats or Republicans. We're just men that love this country. And for myself, and I know Tom feels the same way, and I'm certain Chris does, it's about our younger people. Look what we're leaving, this legacy we're leaving. They're born into a world where they believe into nothing. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chris. I wanted to just go a step further with this whole thing. We can change the hierarchy of the FBI and then have these jokers that are getting elected think they're going to manipulate you 6 ways from Sunday. And that looks like the trend since Jim Comey. I mean, I just struggle to understand why the Republicans didn't give this some airtime. They did nothing, which makes I said to Tom before, I'm totally distrustful. I don't want to go off on this tangent about the borders because, Chris, we're going to get into that in a moment. And we're going to also get into this Ukraine and where the money's going. But the bottom line is they have to reinstill the honor and the integrity into government to start with. And I don't want to say it will trickle into the FBI, but there has to be a commitment that they leave you guys alone and let you do what you have done for generations since the inception of your group. Good. I apologize for that.
Lou, I'd like to have Chris address, one point, and I've talked about it before, and that was when we were street agents and supervisors, assistant special agents in charge of a field division, special agents in charge, all the way up to assistant director. All of my career, nearly 30 years in the FBI as an agent, I didn't ever know who one of my who was supported by my colleagues, coworkers, subordinates, supervisors. That was, everybody had their own opinion about who they supported, who they were going to vote for, but we didn't know who the next agent next to us, who they were going to vote for. So I was particularly astonished when it becomes public that Peter Strzok, Deputy Assistant Director, National Security Division, is exchanging text messages with Lisa Page, who was an attorney. She was not an agent of the FBI. At that time, she was working in the director's office, and they're exchanging messages, and Strzok is making no bones about the fact that he's going after Trump, that they're going to investigate him, do what it takes. They're going to prevent Trump from becoming president. And if he does become president, they have an insurance policy. When I heard that become public at the time, I said, that's impossible. We didn't know who our partners were going to vote for, who our subordinates. That was a personal, well-guarded secret. And I'd like to hear Chris talk about that. Did you have the same opinion regarding your coworkers, your subordinates, and your supervisors about not knowing who they were going to vote for?
100%. I mean, I didn't know anybody's political persuasion. It wasn't discussed, didn't come up. We were focused on what we were doing, Tommy. You remember that. We wanted to be good FBI agents. We were engaged in our investigations or supervising the investigations. There was a culture in the FBI of, we hold up the reputation of the FBI for excellence. And, the Hoover days, I dug into that when I was an attorney back in legal counsel division. There were some issues back then, but they didn't have the same rules that we had, after in the post sort of church committee era. So I think the generation that we served in, Tom, I would describe as the golden years of the FBI. I mean, there was a lot of good things that happened during that time frame, and I don't think anyone can pick a case that came up during that, that 1980 to 2016 time frame. I retired in 06, so I can speak to that, where politics entered into anything that we did. All retired agents say, gee, it was never as good as when we were in there. But when we were in the FBI, and I think Lou would attest to this from the outside, we had a strong reputation. We were rolling up our sleeves and getting into the task forces and mixing it up with the local police departments and working well in task forces and having impact. I don't hear about the FBI anymore. I have two friends that are federal judges, and they tell me we're not seeing quality cases coming in from the FBI. And Lou, I take your point about zooming out and saying, well, we just got to take, we've got to go back to the days of government integrity, restore integrity in government. But I'm sort of pessimistic about that a little bit. We're a divided nation. What I'd like to see is an FBI director who has the spine and the integrity to push back and say, no, I'm not going to do that. Comey had a chance when Trump called him in and demanded loyalty. And he waffled around and didn't say, look, my loyalty is to the government, the Constitution, and my agency, not to one person, the president. He should have been willing to resign at that point. Chris Wray should be willing to resign rather than get pushed into taking cases that the FBI shouldn't be taking or opening cases that they shouldn't be opening. or, you know, in my opinion, supporting some of the decisions that are actually being made at some of the lower levels, agents kneeling in front of BLM, agents being rewarded for kneeling. And that's politics, pure and simple. Got an agent just about going down to head up the Miami office who posted vitriol against Trump. He's still going down there. He's still going to be the SAC. So I need to see a director who's got the integrity and the wherewithal and the backbone to say, no, this is what our agency is set up to put the blinders on, and we're going to work case the same way we'll work Trump the same way we work Hunter Biden. Or put it in reverse, we'll work Hunter Biden with the same aggressiveness that we worked Donald Trump.
You know, Chris, and Tom, this is a very simple concept that we need to embrace. One set of rules universally applied, which your organization used to do. You know, the tragic part of this discussion today, ladies and gentlemen, is that none of this will bear any fruit as long as this political administration is still in power, and we do not have a commitment from the possibly incoming administration that they're going to leave the FBI alone. I can tell you, having been in this community 50 years, I've spoken to people in the media on numerous occasions on cases the FBI was involved in. I just call them tight-lipped. They maintain the integrity of their investigation by not talking about it and not disseminating information that could potentially compromise the integrity of that investigation. I watched the DC sniper shooting. I did 22 interviews with Fox, CNN, MSNBC, and the whole time I knew what the FBI was doing. They were letting Chucky Moose go up there and talk a whole lot. Meanwhile, they were doing what they needed to do in the backdrop. You know, I've come to learn that the FBI, they don't even talk to each other about their cases. I mean, I just don't get how short-sighted they are. But my real concern is that even if we have a change next year in November, that this administration, and I'm fearful with Trump, that they don't decide they're going to weaponize the FBI the same way this administration currently is doing. Guys, we could beat this topic into the ground 6 ways from Sunday, but I'd like to give you guys a final comment, and then I want to transition into a discussion about these borders. We're now watching the Arizona governor, Hobb, deploy the National Guard at the border, stating that the federal government's failing us. But I want to give you guys a closing comment on this FBI issue since it's so close to your hearts. Tom?
Go, Tom.
Well, I think that, what we're talking about is an FBI that has lost its independence. Now, a lot of people thought during the Hoover days he was too powerful. He had incriminating information about the politicians and blackmailed them into going along with whatever budget requests he had or other information. But it certainly has gone too far the other way, where, by all appearances, the FBI director is going along with whatever Biden wants. Now, the other issue is that I talked about before on this podcast is that we had an inspection process. We did internal inspections, every field office, every headquarters division, and our overseas offices in the high 70s at the time I ran that program. And the purpose was to find out if the office, the management, the agents, the analysts were effective and efficient in carrying out the mission of the Bureau. Now, when those inspections started, having been an inspector, and I know Chris also having been an inspector on our way up the chain, when we arrived in a field division to conduct that 2 or 3 week or 4 week investigation of that office, it was career threatening. Especially the management of that office knew that at the end of that 2 or 3 weeks, they could go from running a major field division of the FBI to, as we used to facetiously say, transferred to being in charge of cutting the grass at Quantico. That's how severe these inspections were. And I think Chris will attest to that we went in and many executives were removed. And the reason given for any agent or management person was they were ineffective and or inefficient in their community. The Bureau didn't have the respect that it should have. And as inspectors, we were tasked, to investigate and interview the judges in that community, federal, state, and local, the law enforcement officials, federal, state, and local from the other agencies, and get their opinion on what they thought of the FBI, of the particular management of the FBI in their territory at that time. And if that report was negative, they were going to be removed. And we experienced that. We were on the receiving end of inspections all through our career as supervisors, as assistants in charge of a division, as special agents in charge, later as executives, assistant directors. We also went through that where we were inspected and possibly the outcome could be removal from that position. And we don't see that now. We don't see, in those days, the senior management could directly affect how field office investigations are conducted. And, you look now and it appears like that's gone, that integrity is gone.
Chris?
Yeah, I agree with Tom. The inspection process has been gutted inside the FBI. I don't know if they even have them anymore. I think it's a desk inspection where they just look at some numbers and some data, and they don't send anybody out to the field office to actually conduct an inspection. That was how we held each other accountable inside the FBI. We didn't want the DOJ Inspector General coming in and holding us accountable. We wanted to hold ourselves accountable. It was a learning process, but it was also a way, when you went in as an inspector to inspect an office, you were looking at, were they planning well strategically? Were they being effective at attacking the crime problems and intelligence problems that mattered the most in their area, and zooming out in the Bureau in general? And people had to be productive. They couldn't sit around an entire career and never, go to a grand jury or never have a meaningful statistic in their, in their evaluations. So that's one thing. But the other thing is it just never occurred to either Tom or I, or anybody else, that the FBI would go political. I just never saw it. I mean, I knew there was political pressure. I saw that when we saw that, Tom, when we were at the highest levels of the FBI, and I would be over at DOJ frequently, and sometimes they tried to push you in a certain direction. But I felt well supported, and this was under Mueller. I felt well supported if I said no. And I would go back and brief Mueller and tell him what I just said to DOJ. And Tom said no, Tom had a lot of backbone. He would say it tell it like it was. He spoke truth to power, and that's not happening. There's no independence on the part of the FBI, and there should be. And they're doing that here in North Carolina. The SBI is now being taken out of the hierarchy, the political hierarchy, and is a semi-independent agency. I'm not saying that should or has to happen with the FBI now, but what we need is a leader who will actually push back when it's called for. And maybe I'm harping the same theme over and over again, but absence and overhaul of government term limits, things that need to happen at the broader government level, we've got to restore the FBI back to a place where the American public trusts them. Police chiefs trust them. Lou Palumbo trusts them. And right now, I don't think Chris Wray realizes, because I think he lives in a little bit of a bubble, how much, the type of people that do not trust the FBI. And these are police chiefs, they're state agency heads, they're federal judges, and people who really matter. And of course, the everyday citizens matter. And how you restore that, again, it's a leadership thing. I think, absent an overhaul of government, it's a leadership thing at the director level on down. And you got to instill the new agents in the new agents. Look, you may be progressive, but there are boundaries, and you check your political beliefs when you open up your investigation, or when you walk in the doors of the FBI, if they even do that anymore, your FBI field office. You cannot inject politics into your investigations. Case closed.
I just want to say one last thing, to be fair to this discussion, because we see what the Democrats have done with the FBI. But Mr. Trump, when he had a conversation with James Comey demanding loyalty, that was the impetus to politicizing the FBI and weaponizing them. So this whole mentality of government, maybe what we need to have happen right now is both the Democrats and the Republicans come to some agreement to where they're going to prevent this from happening again. I mean, there's got to be some level of addressment, because I don't think the average American understands how critical the FBI is to the safety and the security of this nation. I want to take a transition, Chris, because I know this is an issue for you and it is for me as well. I mentioned it almost every single podcast, and I did that starting, I guess, more than 2 years ago. At one time we were branded Between the Lines, and my mantra has continued. I'm trying to figure out what this mission is by letting people across this border in an indiscriminate manner, in numbers that we do not have the ability to support a vetting process, compounded by the fact they come from places on the planet where there are no databases maintained, and there's no, I would say, inclination to exchange information, where we are changing IDs, driver's licenses, and birth certificates like we change our underwear. What is driving this with this government? This is treasonous, what is going on right now. I don't understand why the Republicans are not using that language, and I find no comfort in using that term and directing it towards our president. When Joe Biden got elected, my attitude was quite simple. He's the president, and we support him unconditionally, and we want him to do things that are in the best interest of this country and primarily our young people. That just simply hasn't happened, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not saying that because I'm a Republican. I would make that statement no matter who sat in that chair. But I'm looking at this border issue, and my first question is, who's supposed to benefit from this? We're overrunning our cities to the point where they can't afford to manage this problem. New York, Chicago, any number of these, Seattle, Denver, they're popping up all over the place. Who's supposed to benefit from this border policy? Chris, you want to give me some your insight on this topic?
Yeah, I have some. I'm cynical. I'm cynical. Let's start with that. I'm cynical that this administration, and I don't want to sound political, but this administration wants more Democratic voters, and these are immigration or illegal immigrations in numbers that would easily swing elections forever in this country. And so their talk is about immigration reform. What immigration reform is to them is you naturalize and legitimize all the illegal aliens that came into this country over the last decade or even beyond. So naturally, they're going to be Democratic voters for the most part. You know, we see Hispanic voters and you know, voters who now have swung to the Republican side, but it's taken a long time. But they're actually, their values align with conservative values, if you will. So I'll start with that. This border, there's no logical reason. There's nothing that a rational person could say and look at this and say, hey, this is good for this country in any way, to just tear our borders down. And as you say, Lou, we have no idea who's coming into this country. They are coming from areas that there are no records. They don't bring any records with them. They barely have an ID. So anybody that argues that we know who's coming in and it's an orderly process, they're being dishonest. So we swung that border open. Anybody can come across right now. And that has, in my view, has compromised every security measure that we've implemented in this country since 9/11. It is a national security issue that of monumental proportions, and yet we see them flowing across the border in unprecedented numbers. And I don't know how any rational person can say this is healthy for this country. We're all compassionate. We all know people who are self-made, who came into this country and had nothing and started a business, became solid citizens. But in the numbers that we see coming across right now, it's a question of the capacity of this country to handle it, number one. It's a question of national security. It's a question of strains on our budget. And I can only see one reason why this is happening, and that is the cynical political belief that they will vote Democrat in the future. And if you do immigration reform the way they want it, that's only one thing, and that is legitimize all the people that came across that border illegally.
Tom, I'm going to go to you, but I'm just going to give you the gentleman in the Senate that wants to make everybody legal in the country who's illegal, and that's Chuck Schumer. 10 million plus people who have illegally accessed this country. Tom, I'd like to get some feedback from you on this topic.
Well, not just Schumer, Lou, but last week you have Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois making a couple of statements regarding the immigrants coming across, the illegal ones coming across. And that is, well, our armed forces cannot recruit enough people. The Army, Navy, Air Force, the Marines are pretty much doing all right, but that's a smaller elite force. But the big military agencies can't recruit the numbers that they want to recruit. And therefore, when these illegals come in, we could, as illegal migrants, put them to work, put them in the military. And then if they serve a couple of years, they could become citizens just based on that. Now, many good people have done it that way and become loyal, strong Americans. For example, here in Virginia, where I live, the Winsome Sears, the deputy governor, basically, came from Jamaica. And she wanted to be a U.S. citizen, so she joined the military. And then when she came out, now she is as strong of a patriot of the United States as you're ever going to hear or see in person. But that's how she did it. But we don't know from the 8 to 10 million that have poured across our border, many of them young military age men, several thousand from the People's Republic of China, by the way. We don't know if they're going to be loyal to America if they get in our military. And if they become members of the military in any great numbers, that could be a threat if they decide to pose the threat against the United States. Now, Durbin has also said that, these migrants that, they can work the farms, they can work jobs that American people don't want to work and all of that. But he's using that as his political excuse that we need illegal immigration to support the United States infrastructure. It's absurd, but that's his belief, and a lot of people are listening to it. And I think the other thing, in my opinion, is the globalists now, World Economic Forum, the George Soroses, they've been trying for 10 or 20 years to even the playing field around the world so that the U.S. isn't the superpower, but all the other countries rise up to the level of the United States. What they've learned over time is that they can't get the rest of the world up to our level. So therefore, bring us down to their level. So all of this illegal immigration coming in, and then the need to feed them, to give them health care, to put their kids in school, all of the things that we're doing to non-tax paying migrants that have come in is just draining the resources. Now, suddenly, in the last month or two, you're hearing the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, talking about this. You're hearing the mayor of some other cities, governors of some of the states saying, we can't have this. We can't support this. They're shutting down services to American citizens that American citizens are paying for through their taxes. They're shutting that down in order to service the migrants. And I think that that's another goal of the World Economic Forum, of the globalist, is it's another way to bring the United States down, bring down our ability to provide services to even our own citizens.
Tom, the thing that's so interesting about this discussion is that the loudest voices in opposition to our border policies have become Democrats across the country. As I mentioned earlier, when we opened up this podcast today, the governor in Arizona, Hobbs, has now deployed the National Guard, and she's critical of the immigration policy put forth by the current administration. I mean, I don't know how many people have to tell you what you're doing is destroying our cities. Eric Adams did not mince any words. He said, almost verbatim, the immigration problem in New York City is going to destroy New York City. He associated the reduction of staff by 5%, police, fire, sanitation, and even tapping into education is the byproduct of supporting the illegal immigrants. I hope people are listening to this. And the thing I want to remind everyone, this is not about promoting a Republican platform or a Democrat's platform. You would hear the same comments regardless of which party was in power, because this doesn't have a political affiliation to it. It has a tie to the future of this country and our young people. Guys, I want to give you a closing comment, because we're going to wrap the show. I want to give you a closing comment on this immigration issue.
Thank you, Lou. I think the most dangerous word out there right now is immigration reform, because immigration reform can anesthetize part of the population into thinking they're doing something positive. Immigration reform to a lot of people, a lot of political people on the left, and I'm talking about the left, but the far left especially, means legitimizing and legalizing a huge swath of population, probably over 10 million, who have broken the law on the way in, and some of them in many ways. Many, I shouldn't say, again, I'm not stigmatizing people who want a better life. What I'm saying is we've incentivized a lot of bad people to come in. A lot of bad actors are coming across that border right now, and it's presenting a national security problem. If we just remove, it's a manageable problem. We should remove the incentives and go back to when forcing legal immigration, if you will. I'm not saying it's a wall. I'm not saying it's a one silver bullet solution, but it's a policy solution of remain in Mexico. Don't incentivize illegal immigration. Don't incentivize people to make that dangerous journey. And let's not take in 10 million people that we can't afford to support, as Tom points out. So immigration reform, to me, I get the hair on the back of my neck is up every time I hear that word, because I know what it means to the Democrats, and I know what it means to Republicans. Republicans, I think, are on the right side of this issue, not to politicize it, but there's nothing wrong with legal immigration. That's it. Legal immigration, borders, every other country has them.
But the thing I know about life is that in order to survive, sometimes you have to stop on a dime and change direction. And I know people find it abhorrent that we might suggest a wall, for example. Well, the wall is not just a physical wall, as the three of us know by background. It's technology as well. But they've got to get a handle on this thing. And I have to say something, and I want to make sure people understand this is not something that I am promoting. I've talked to people, and they're noticing the ethnicity of everybody coming into the country. And they asked me, do you think they're trying to change the ethnic makeup of this country? And I don't even like to field that question in response, because I hope that certainly isn't the case. But the golden boy in our whole political environment, Barack Obama, was pretty clear about stating he was going to redefine America. If this is part of the redefinition of America, it's going to lend itself to the demise of America. And I say this to everyone who's listening to this podcast: you need to listen to these two gentlemen. You need to encourage people to hear what's being said here today. It's not being promoted as a political platform. We're trying to tell you there's trouble in paradise here, folks. And I know you're busy. I keep saying this. You're distracted. You're feeding, clothing, and educating your children. You're paying mortgages or rent. You're paying car payments and insurance. You're trying to get through the day. You're chasing the generation of laptop or cell phone or flat screen TV. You better redirect your attention on what's going on in this country. I'm going to say this to you. You can contact us, and we're not looking for you to rubber stamp what we say. We're giving you food for thought. OperationTruthOfficial@gmail.com is the vehicle by which you may give us your thoughts and your expressions. Tom, I'm going to cut this for today. And ladies and gentlemen, when we reconvene for the next podcast, we're going to have a discussion with you, a further discussion about the Ukraine. Tom Fuentes is going to give you a little bit of a backstory on Europe. He's going to give you some information about Putin and his concerns of what might have transpired in the Ukraine. But what really I love is where these monies are going, that this government is just pouring into this country. Guys, this has been Operation Truth. You'll hear Chris and Tom again in the next podcast. We're going to get into these discussions. I thank you for joining us. I encourage you to tell people to listen to what we're saying. We're trying also to expand this platform so you have something other than Fox, MSNBC, and ABC, and CNN, all of whom decided to become extensions of your political parties. And by the way, in the next podcast, we're going to talk about the power and influence of the media, because they're really running us into the ground. Guys, I thank you so much. Chris, I thank you. Tom, I thank you as always. And you're going to hear us all again in the next podcast.